So I thought I would do a bit of a different one here. This is from White Fang, Jack London. Um, and one of the reasons I bring this up is people often say that you have to have a hook, something in the first line that you have to very early on establish who the narrator is or who your main character is or get a hook. And I want you to look and listen to this opening. Dark spruce forest frowned on either side of the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost, and they seemed to lean toward each other, black and ominous in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless, without movement, so lone and cold that the spirit of it was not even that of sadness. There was a hint in it of laughter, but of a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen hearted Northland wild. Now, clearly, in this paragraph, we're not getting a point of view. We're not getting who is the character. What we're getting here is a tremendous sense of atmosphere and setting, that this is a dangerous place, a wild place. It is cold, it is barren, it is inhospitable, it is somehow greater and more majestic and more powerful than mankind because of the grimness of infallibility. The smile of the Sphinx. Like someone looking at this now would go, right, so it's cold, right? So there's cold trees and there's snow and it's not nice. That you could be as dismissive of this style of writing as you want to be. You can distill it down and be snide about it. But this is so evocative. People might complain, oh, well, it's overwritten. Well, I got the point after the first couple of sentences. You go, congratulations, you got the point after the first couple of sentences. It doesn't mean that we can't then engage with and I suppose revel in probably be too much, but engage with this atmosphere that is being created. You don't always have to be really sparse with what it is. You don't always have to give, well, here's the bare minimum of what you need to know. When we talk about economy in writing, people sometimes think it means you can make it shorter. Economy in writing is using the fewest possible words to achieve the desired effect. And quite often, people forget the last part of that phrase. You can have a section of a novel and you go, well, the author could have done that shorter. They could have made that section shorter. You go, congratulations. Yes, they could. Is there anything else really obvious that you want to say? They could have made it shorter. And they go, yeah, and it would have had, and if they're being honest, they will say it would have had nearly the same effect. If they're being dishonest, they would say, and it would have the same effect. The reason I highlight that is quite often authors intend an effect. And most authors, the majority of authors that I've ever spoken to, are only using the words they think will achieve that effect. No more, no less. They are aiming to make that effect work. Now, for you personally, maybe you got that effect earlier, but as I've said on a number of occasions, we personally are not representative of all readers. We have to be aware that we are part of a group. And in that group, think of a standard distribution curve. There are some people who are going to get it earlier than us, and some people who require more time and get it after us. Standard distribution. So in order to sort of hit that median mark, to hit the sort of middle with the greatest number of people getting it at exactly the right moment, That's what an author is aiming for. And we can fall either side of that divide. There's, no author can account for everything. But insisting that an author just shorten everything. Part of literature is an experience that is not the same as journalism. It is not the same as, in general, TV, and is not the same in general as movies. Movies generally take under 2 hours. TV shows, an episode of a TV show, is generally under an hour. How they approach storytelling is partly predicated on the amount of time that they have to tell the story. So if you tell a book which conservatively, let's say, takes 20 hours to read, the same way that you tell an episode of a TV show or a film, you're not paying attention to the medium. Now, it could be for new authors or modern authors that they want to try and sell their books to studio for TV or film adaptation. So if you write more that way, if you write in that style, if you break your narrative up episodically, where you have these natural peaks and troughs that would correspond with TV episodes, go for it. But the vast majority of books will never be adapted. That's simple fact. So why hamper yourself, or why tie one hand behind your back to mimic the style and structure of TV when you're writing a book? Just write TV episodes. If you want TV, if you want to do it for TV, write TV. Don't write a novel. On the other hand, very cogent and powerful argument to the contrary would be a significant proportion of our readership watches a lot of TV, they watch a lot of films, therefore they're used to decoding that style of narrative. They're used to engaging with that style of narrative. So I should cater to that. I should write to the strengths of my audience, to how they understand narrative. So I should be using aspects of how TV and film tell their stories. So you can see it's not a neat answer. It's not a neat you must do. You have to weigh it up in terms of the narrative. And the opening of White Fang, this is incredibly evocative. The sense of place, the atmosphere created, the feeling of the place, not just the physicality, not just how it appears, but how it actually feels and how it makes the spirit feel, the essence of this landscape, of this location. And that is something that you can do with words, you can do with the selection of language. So, one more point that I want to mention here is in relation to the style of this, that some people might look at this and they would look at this very rich and complex and elaborate, and we could even say luscious description of the landscape, of the world that is being served up to us here in this opening. They would look at that and say that this is overwritten. This has too many descriptors. This is too embellished. This is bordering on purple prose because it's going too heavy-handed in creating and evoking the sense of place. And again, that's when we talk about things being purple prose, understanding the type of narrative that something is in. Purple prose is not a standard where you go, here is the line. Anything above that is purple. Anything below that is not purple. That's not what purple prose is. It's the same as when we say, oh, you're overthinking it. That implies there's a level of thought that is necessary, and you have expended too much thought, which is a bad thing. But that's just the same as saying you're underthinking it. You're not thinking enough. That there seems to be a level, but that is going to change dependent on the thing that you're thinking about. Purple prose is much the same. H.P. Lovecraft is accused of purple prose, but in order to achieve the effect that Lovecraft wanted, that overly or over, actually, describing it as overly embellished is wrong. That heavily embellished language is integral to the thing that he was trying to evoke. Now, in terms of the standard that we expect in, say, horror, yes, it will appear overly embellished. It will appear purple. It is beyond what is the norm or the standard. But when we take into account the context, when we take into account what Lovecraft was trying to achieve, it's not purple anymore. It's actually entirely appropriate for the thing that he is trying to evoke. That sense of otherworldliness, that sense of being uncomfortable, that sense of it being inhuman and trying to craft human language to describe something that is inherently indescribable. So when we look at something like this, we have a landscape that is ostensibly barren. But look at the amount of language trying to evoke that sense of barrenness. That describing a landscape as barren is barren language, that it would be very empty language, and it doesn't get across how barren something is. It doesn't get across how inhospitable this landscape is. What we have here, again, is an author trying to create, using the barest minimum possible, the true sense and evocation of place. And because of that, if you apply some sort of arbitrary level of beyond this, it is purple, this could look overly embellished. Dark spruce forest frowned. Oh, personification. We don't want personification. That's trite. On either side of the frozen waterway, the trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost. Well, what other color would frost be? We don't need white covering. They seemed to lean. Oh, again, seeming to lean. Did they lean or did they not? We can break apart this language. We can tear it down. We can say, oh, it could have been shorter doing it this way. It could have been neater doing it this way. It could have been more economical doing it this way. But in creating that economy, we're actually making the language more barren. And what we have is an author juxtaposing barrenness with a wealth of information about it to create an effect, to create this effect of, this is so barren. Look at all the words I have to use to describe this barrenness because it is so barren. It, it is a way of, again, playing with the language to create an effect. It's a way of investing the reader in this, of evoking a sense of place richly, even if the place being evoked is the antithesis of rich. And trying to apply the same standard to all types of narratives lead us into the same problem that I have discussed in terms of adaptation, of applying the same register and approach to all films as if all films are doing exactly the same thing, are telling the same type of story, that they all have to use exactly the same criteria. And that's not to say that there aren't certain standards that have to be upheld, but those standards have to be applicable for the narrative. There is room for things to move. Now, clearly, you don't want massive grammatical errors that make what is on the page impossible to decipher because there's about 90 different meanings depending on how you try to get the gibberish to make sense. That clearly it would, in this instance, be awful, be really bad writing. But then you think of something like stream of consciousness. And if stream of consciousness is being used, we wouldn't use the same grammatical rules because that wouldn't reflect stream of consciousness. So again, the type of writing is going to suggest that we approach it in different ways, and being flexible in our approach, in not being rigid and going, here are my set of criteria, this is what it must be. We always have to be cognizant of the style of narrative, the type of narrative, of the effect that we believe the author may be trying to achieve with this text. And I know it's not fashionable to consider authorial intent, but it is incredibly useful in trying to decipher meaning from a text and trying to understand what is going on in a text. It is one more additional tool to aid us in forming our own interpretation. An author's intent doesn't override ours, but it does help us form our opinion. But I think one last thing